Today, we're going to be answering two of the most asked knife sharpening questions of all time. Number one, what are the appropriate grit progression steps? Meaning, what grit steps should you take so that you're not wasting a bunch of time sharpening on too fine of a stone or wasting time with a coarser stone that you don't need. Basically, which grit steps should you take? And two, how many passes does it actually take to refine the previous scratch pattern with the appropriate grit progression steps? Now, the answer to this one actually surprised me as I was testing it, and I ran into a bigger problem that I actually didn't expect. Now, as a disclaimer, this is actually a very complicated subject that I'm going to answer as simply as possible. The rabbit hole goes crazy deep on this one, and I'll try to link to a video down below that may help explain why. But in this video, I'm going to simplify this topic to the extreme so that you get the actual answers you're looking for and nothing you really don't. So first off, number one, what are the appropriate grit progression steps? Now, to answer this simply, 1,000 grit steps are about as big of a jump as you want to go. Any larger than that, and you'll be spending a significant amount of time trying to refine deeper scratches than your stone will be comfortable with. So a real life example here is jumping from a 220 grit diamond stone to a 2,000 grit Sharpening Koromaku. Now, this stone will refine these scratches given enough time, but the problem that you'll have with the finer stones is actually loading with material more than you're actually sharpening. So significant time is wasted cleaning the stone surface than actually sharpening on the stone.
So here's that 220 grit diamond edge to 2000 grit Koromaku edge after 10 back and forth passes. We have a bunch of deep scratches remaining. Now, I continued this 10 pass test in 10 pass increments up to 70 passes. And even after 70 passes, there's still some very deep scratches remaining. And hopefully this comes across on camera, but after about 10 passes, the stone will load up with material, making it less effective. So this is basically a very inefficient and time-consuming way to sharpen. Basically, don't skip grits.
Now, an appropriate grit jump would be from a 220 grit profiling stone to a 1,000 grit stone. That's about a 1,000 grit step. Now, the coarser stones don't load as much, allowing you to do a lot more work with them much quicker. Now, after the 1,000 grit, you can then jump to the 2,000 grit, and that would be a much more appropriate grit progression.
So here's that 220 grit edge and the 1,000 grit edge. We have pretty good grit refinement very quickly. How quickly, and what about those deep scratches at the bottom? Well, I'll get to that in a second.
So to recap, 1,000 grit steps is about what you want to stick to. You can do intermediate steps if you like. However, I find that there's not much point to jumping to, say, a 1,500 grit stone in between, say, the 1,000 and the 2,000, if your ultimate goal is to end up with the finer stone anyway. It'll just be a waste of time. Same with, say, a 600 grit intermediate stone between the 220 and 1,000. You just don't really need to do that, and I'll show you why in a second. So question number two is, how many passes does it actually take to refine the scratches with 1,000 grit steps? Now, the answer is way less than you probably think. But there's a catch. I found that jumping right from a 220 grit to a 1,000 grit diamond stone, the scratch pattern is refined in about 4 back and forth passes. Yes, only 4 passes. You have to remember that we're only removing a very small amount of material here. Basically, the difference in scratch pattern depth between the 220 and 1,000, which is not very much.
So here we are again. This is a 220 to a 1,000 grit diamond stone scratch pattern. After just 4 passes on the stone, we have perfect refinement. At least where we actually hit the surface, anyway.
However, this actually highlighted another problem as I was testing this, which may require more than 4 passes on your stone and my stone at home in actual use, which is angle control. Now, it turns out that angle control actually has a lot more to do with how many passes you need to make. If you have absolutely perfect angle control, and for the record, nobody actually does, you could theoretically just make about 4 passes from the 220 to the 1,000 to get a perfectly refined scratch pattern. But since you, and I don't have perfect angle control, we run into a problem where we refine the scratches from the previous grit on only one area of the bevel. But in other areas, due to lack of perfect angle control, we don't even touch the stone. Hence, we have to do more passes to sort of accumulate that error in order to refine those areas. This probably doesn't make sense, so let me give you the example.
So here we are. This is a 220 grit scratch pattern after hitting it on a 1000 grit sharpen for 10 back and forth passes. You can see that where I did come in contact with the stone surface, this scratch pattern was perfectly refined. But because I wasn't holding the exact same angle from the 220 grit stone, I didn't even hit the apex on any of those passes. So it's still at 220 grit. So because we all have a very small amount of angle slop as we are sharpening, we may have to adjust in very small increments in order to hit all portions of the bevel. This is why we will probably have to do more passes than absolutely necessary to get a fully refined scratch pattern when freehand sharpening. Even though technically the scratch pattern could be perfectly refined in only a handful of passes with perfect angle control. Now this is also why fixed angle systems can get away with smaller stones and not have to do an insane number of passes to refine the apex, because angle control is almost perfect. So you're always refining exactly where you want to.
So to answer this question simply, if you take 1000 grit steps, it only takes about 10 back and forth passes to refine the previous scratch pattern, if you have perfect angle control. But since we don't, I would say that the quickest and most efficient way is to do 10 passes and inspect the edge. If you still see scratches, adjust slightly and do 10 more until all of the previous scratches are gone. What I wouldn't do is sit there and do a ton of passes at once without inspecting. You're probably just wasting time working one area and completely ignoring another. Now you can use the old Sharpie trick to help you narrow it down, but in any case, only doing as many passes as necessary saves time and wear on your stones. I hope this video helps. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.